Yeah, it's going. It's going. Mm-hmm. Have you seen some of them ones so far? Yeah, I've been mixing it up. I don't know. I don't do it for money. I'm not monetizing. Yeah, it's like. Yeah, yeah. What? Not right now. You can do it later. All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May I have attention, please? All quiet, please. Thank you. So here we are. We are going to be doing 7th period for the at-home viewers. I've got 2 of them uploaded already for government class. So if you're ever gone or you're like, what was that about? You can look. It's pretty easy. You don't have to go necessarily to my Google Classroom, although there is good, accurate information on my Google Classroom page. Like, so for example, Anna, what accurate information is available on my Google Classroom page that would be something that might help calm one's nerves? Dates for quizzes. When is that quiz coming up? Of what week? I mean, who cares what week, but I mean, sometimes it's actually important to know what week the Tuesday falls on. Yeah, for you guys. It's the blue day is on Tuesday of next week. Green has it Wednesday. And also I have links to my YouTube videos. But if you just go to YouTube and like go to John K. Hansen, you go to the channel, you can find it. And I need to make some adjustments because the settings that it's on initially are like for the lowest high def, and I think it needs to be lower than that because it's taken about 6 hours each time to get 4 different class videos. And it's interesting, some of you guys know the tech stuff a lot better than I do. Each class, when I make a video, it rolls over from 1 to 2. So I'm uploading 2 videos of, just under 45 minutes combined, which is kind of nuts. But we want to make sure everybody here and at home has the opportunity to see what was taking place in here. So I'm doing this class this time. I've done 2, the other 2 times have been the green day, but now it's blue day. And blue is cool, isn't it? Which is cooler, blue or green? Or are you like, we're not into the competition? I don't know, you guys go first, so you'll have the quiz first. So anyway, so what we're going to be doing in here today, go ahead, take out your notes, right? Oh yeah, there's all the videos. It was pretty easy to find, wasn't it?
I was watching one and the class is so boring. You're like, what's this movie? And you're like,
Oh, my students are never boring. No, actually, one of my 12th graders is like, put it on 2 times speed. Yeah, and I mean, I was thinking, sometimes I go too fast anyway, but you're like, I can still understand you, Mr. Hansen. Because sometimes I'd like try to slow it down for dramatic purposes. Because sometimes if you're trying to get an audience, it helps to slow it down. But if you're trying to get through a video, you're like, oh my gosh, Mr. Hansen, speed it up. If you're trying to fall asleep at night, slow it down. Maybe, I don't know, maybe my regular speed is good enough. If you just need to fall asleep and you're like, what would help me fall asleep? And I don't know, not Mr. Thank you very much. That's so delightful that you would say that and so forth. Okay. Well, and actually I do a pretty good job, I think, keeping most people awake. Maybe they're afraid of what would happen to them if they fell asleep, which is actually, that's like, but sometimes it'd be people like, how many of you guys have ever been through a week where like maybe one night you got, 2 or 3 hours of sleep in a night? I mean, that's hard. That's like when you pull all-nighters, and then the next day, it really is hard in class. I mean, even if the speaker is the most dynamic speaker ever, you're tired, and you're sitting, and you're not getting called on necessarily. And it's hard, right? It is hard. Okay? Why are you looking at Scott? Okay. You're looking around. You're like accusatory eyes and so forth. I mean, ever had that? Students like, yes, I have. Okay. So, anyway, so what we're going to be doing in here today is continuing our look at United States government. You've got the quiz date, preparation. Any questions about as far as what you need to do for the preparation? Yes, Trey.
this isn't about the preparation.
What about?
This isn't about the preparation.
Go for it. What's your question?
But you have to watch the videos that you post online.
Good question. The answer is, with respect to the ones I take of here, no. Only if you want to see it again, or if you've been gone. That's the only time. These are put together primarily for the at-home students, right? And I've got 1, 2 on my roster for 7th period. I mean, I got you guys. I got a really big group. I got 14 students that come in here at this time on the Green Day. And then my 8th period class, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 at home. So altogether, I've got 9 at-home viewers that are going to be, supposed to be, watching this particular video of the 3rd day once it goes up. Yeah. Well, then they'll have to wake up at some point and play it back. How many of you guys have ever fallen asleep during some kind of like televised thing? I mean, I literally am like, I know this is going to be a good movie. And I'm on my couch, and I'm sitting in a chair, and then I wake up, and I'm like, what happened? You know, was there a movie? I mean, have you had that experience? And you're kind of going in and out, and there's like, movies are really weird if you like are kind of like falling asleep while the movie's going on. It's not really as the director intended. It's sort of like this mishmash and then stuff going on in your head. So Anna, I appreciate your concern about my at-home viewers. Yes. During the actual time they're viewing it, they can speed it up. They can pause it. And actually sometimes some of you guys may have done that, like last quarter, maybe, in order to be like, what did he say? What? What? You know, like pause, replay. Yeah. Does closed captioning work with my voice? Really? Is it very accurate? Really? Is that because of the way I talk? I mean, like, how do you close caption? I mean, like, what letters convey that meaning? And how do you do those? Well, you have to actually be able to lip read. I mean, you could. Yeah, I mean, sometimes the automatic closed captions aren't very good. You really do need to have like a professional put the closed caption in there to the film. All right, go ahead. Yes.
I just want to say something.
Yes. What's up?
I just did that homework one day. Why is my computer not working?
Well, and I felt bad because it's been working pretty well, but my 9th grade ones, and check me, is this on? It's blue. That's good, which means that the microphone right here, like, whoa, the microphone is working. But I had a whole video with the 9th grade ones, and I was watching them like, oh, God. It had turned off because I think I had it here, and I was fiddling around, and I think I knocked it off, whatever. So now I put it around the back. So they have to crank it up real high because my voice is just background volume. No, this is the microphone. We invested in higher tech equipment than, I mean, none of this, yeah, I bought all this stuff. Yeah, I bought all this stuff. I mean, when I was doing the at-home videos last quarter, I just used my laptop thing, which was fine because I was like right up in front of my laptop and I had the PowerPoint on and that was fine. Now, it's mixed. I'm teaching you. You are present. You are my audience. You are my learners. And then we got the at-home ones. So, but Trey, good question. Sometimes I will have other video content, like YouTube videos and so forth. I haven't yet. For my 9th grade class, I already put the link, for like the Mongol videos. I don't know if you guys remember that from last year. I taught the Mongols and I put some videos up, that helped elaborate that. That's what they're doing at home. I will always try to make it very clear to you what you should be focusing on. Between now and Tuesday, Anna, what should your fellow classmates in my blue group be focusing on preparing for as part of their at-home time? Quiz is one thing, yeah, and that's probably the biggest thing at this point. I don't have any particular videos, and I'm not going to create any more of my own lectures for your at-home purposes. Okay? Does that help? Okay, good. All right. Shall we get into this? Oh, and by the way, these were great, almost perfection papers. I mean, really, I was actually really impressed with last year's 9th grade class and their film critiques. Because I was going through and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many good ones that people did. Yeah, it was actually kind of a fun research project, so forth. I mean, as they come by. And next year when you go into like IB History 11th grade, you actually get to do research for your History IA on a topic that you want to do. that has to do with history. So that's always much funner to do research on things that are of your choice. Okay? All right, let's get to it. We're talking about government, and we're talking about legitimacy. And actually, this is really fascinating, because as I was going through the summer and thinking, I'm going to have 10th graders, I'm going to be talking about legitimacy and national security and domestic security and economic social satisfaction, I'm like, these are really relevant in the times that we're living in right now. Really relevant. Maybe not the national security one so much, because we're not like in a major war. We're not like necessarily being invaded. Although, 19 years ago, Friday, there was a national security episode that went really bad. What happened 9/11? What happened on 9/11, 2001, JT? Was it an accident of the airplanes? No, what happened in the airplanes? Yeah. How many airplanes hit? 2 hit the 2 Twin Towers. How many airplanes hit overall?
Well, there's 2 that went to Twin Towers,
Yep.
and then there's one that tried to go to the Hexagon or whatever it's called.
It's called the Pentagon, and there was... It's a shape. No, it's a cool. Yeah, I like that.
And then
Well, we were thinking about making it with 5 sides, but I don't know, 8 seemed better. Yeah, I mean, that's cool.
and then it crashed in Pennsylvania.
So there were 4 planes. Okay, there were 4 planes, and one did. It crashed not too far from where I grew up. Very close to where I grew up. In fact, one of the pilots on that plane had been graduated like a year or 2 before me in high school. He was one of the pilots. He was killed. That was what the terrorists did. They killed the pilots, killed the crew, took over the plane, and they flew that one into the Pentagon, which is the Defense Department, the Department of Defense. They did. They hit it. People died. The fourth one had passengers, and they were following some of the news. They had their like cell phones and things like that, and so they were having communication with family members, and those family members were telling them about planes that crashed into the Twin Towers. The first one is like, maybe was that an accident? And the second one comes like, we got something bad going down. And so a number of the passengers, in fact, the sample paper that I had you guys look at for the film critique, remember that was Flight 93, I think, was it 93 or 91? Anyway, the passengers raided the terrorist in the cabin, and they didn't know how to fly a plane, and that plane crashed into the ground. That plane probably would have headed toward either the Capitol building, where Congress meets, or the White House, where the president lives and works. But it didn't. That was a national security threat, and all kinds of things that the government did afterwards. Write that down. When there's national security threats, the government is expected to do what it needs to do to handle those threats. Do you think we put a lot of money in the last 19 years in trying to handle the kinds of threats that terrorists from outside our country would carry out to attack our country? Heck yeah. And it's, I mean, just at the airports, for example, there's been massive increased security in order so that, terrorists can't do the kinds of things that they did 19 years ago. Yeah.
How would you know, like, how do people know that the people on the plane tried to, or like, took over the bad guy and then broke the plane?
The ones on the 4th plane, they were having telephone calls, cell phone calls with family members, and the family members were watching it on television. I remember that day going to work and listening on the radio, and they're like, oh, there's been this thing, this took place, and actually that was just like a surreal day, because as the day went on, I mean, it was just like horrible. We got further news. When it became quite clear, like airports shut down, I mean, everything was shut down, but that 4th plane, the people on the plane knew that terrorists had taken over the plane, but they didn't know what they were up to. In previous times, when you had hijackers take over a plane, they would land it somewhere and then hold out for ransom or like release of their, people who they like that are in jail who are for the same cause. But no, this was a different kind of thing. They intentionally took over the planes with the idea of having those planes full of jet fuel go as like a flying bomb. And they targeted those planes in particular. All four of the planes were cross-country flights that had a lot of fuel. I think I'm going to say two of them, most of them, if not all of them, took off from Boston or East Coast cities. So I think one of them took off from Washington, D.C., turned around, and then went straight back into it. So there was a lot of fuel, and when those things hit, boom. I mean, you saw what it did to the Twin Towers. Both of them went down because of the massive fire. Okay, yes? I think some of them may be. I don't know. That would be really hard. But yeah. Yeah. I mean, so, national security. Yes, Trey. Okay. Okay, never mind. All right. So, one of the themes that I'm trying to develop as far as national security is let's look at the geographical connection to national security. We saw last time you guys had great advice on we need a military, we need it modern, right? We need them well-trained. We need a strong economy in order to pay for the well-trained, modern, well-equipped military, all right? No, that is no small thing. It helps to have alliances. You got that in your notes too? It helps to have alliances. It helps to be in a neutral position, or at least a positive position with the countries. It's like, oh, look at all those countries. I mean, even 9/11, we weren't at war with Afghanistan where those bad guys trained. They were training in Afghanistan. We're like, oh my gosh, we can't be involved in all these different places in the world. I mean, there was a government there that wasn't really good, but like, come on. There's a lot of parts of the world where the government's not great. How can that be a threat to the United States? Well, if a bunch of bad guys get permission to train in Afghanistan and then come after us, what are we going to do about it? Anybody know what did we do about Afghanistan after 9/11? We did. We went in there. We overthrew the Taliban government. These are sort of like extreme Muslim believers who had control of that government. And we overthrew them. And we started a war that still continues actually today. You're like, oh my gosh. I mean, who's the main opponent of the United States government and the Afghan government that we're trying to support and keep going? It's the Taliban, which is, when you're thinking like, which group is which group is which group? ISIS is not too far apart from Taliban. They still call themselves Taliban, and they're actually not doing too bad in many parts of Afghanistan. Sorry, folks. Yeah, I know. So, like, our government's like, can we figure out a way to get out of the war in Afghanistan? Because we put a lot of life and money and so forth into the war in Afghanistan. And one question in my mind is like, well, if we leave and the Taliban come in control again, are we going to have another 9/11?
Yeah.
Let's hope not. Yeah. I mean, ISIS, which is another threat of extremist Muslims, and they're popping up in other parts of the world, they're also a threat. I mean, like, how many different threats are there to the national security of the United States of America? There's a lot. Yeah. And can the big military just sort of like crunch it and it goes away? You can try. Another thing, I don't know if we had this last time. In the other class, somebody suggested, one of the classes were like, we need satellites. I'm like, actually, satellite and intelligence. Write that down. We need really good intelligence services. Spies. And the ability to figure out what kind of communications are going on. That's actually a little nervous when the government is like got really good ability to like listen in on all kinds of conversations going on in all kinds of places. Because do you like the government listening in on your conversations? You're like, I have privacy, leave me alone. Do you like the government listening in on bad guy conversations? Yes. And so that helps provide for national security. So we know what those groups, where they are, what they're up to, so that we can stop them before they pull something off.
So, I know you said satellite are if we work with a satellite weapon, wouldn't that be something?
Yes, and that's something we really don't want to do. You guys understand that? How many of you guys have like watched, I'm trying to think, what was that movie? I think it was Gravity. You seen Gravity? Which is really cool because they're up in space and then somebody like uses some satellite like weaponry, and it blows up somebody else's satellite, and it creates lots of trash, which is zipping around the planet really, really fast and disrupting other satellites, and that's really bad, right? Because it's like, where does your trash go? You put it by the curbside, it goes to a dump. Where do decayed, broken bits and pieces of stuff that we've sent out into the upper atmosphere go? Anybody know? Interesting question. It's in orbit, and when it breaks or falls apart or decays, what happens to it? Eventually it does. As it comes into, falls out of orbit and eventually comes into our atmosphere, what happens to that stuff? It burns up, yeah. And usually it burns up in such a degree so that you don't get really big chunks. It's not like you're walking along and oh man, satellite debris, It's, it usually burns up on re-entry. Some big pieces, though, for some old, like space kind of things and so forth, have actually held together in some pretty big chunks. Like you have a whole big space station or something and eventually enters orbit. Yeah, you got to be careful on that. And it isn't like Hollywood where it's always going to land in some major landmark building or something like that. I mean, that happens in every Hollywood movie. But most of the time it like burns up in like the Western Australian desert or in the ocean or in Siberia or something. So the key thing that I want to convey to you guys is, in the long space of things, national security does benefit. We do benefit by having favorable geography. All right, make sure you have that in your notes. Favorable geography. Here's some favorable geographic things that have helped the United States over its long history. Oceans. Yes, we could have enemies on the other side of the ocean, but what do they need in order to get across the ocean in order to cause us problems? They need a navy. So let's add to that. If we want an ocean to protect us, what do we also need to make sure we have very good on the ocean? Very good navy, yeah. Exactly. And so actually it's interesting because Britain is one of the best examples. The last time Britain was successfully invaded from just across the water, the English Channel. I mean, it's not that far. You can actually see across it in some parts with added. The last time they were successfully invaded was 1066. I mean, it's been almost 1,000 years since somebody was able to pull off an invasion of Britain. What military component did the British employ to make sure that water was going to help protect them? A very strong navy. Yeah, the British Navy is a big feature in history. We covered that a little bit last year as well. Yes? In World War II, when you cover World War II as part of IB history, your junior year, you'll see the Germans conquered like all of Europe, except for the parts that they let remain neutral, like Switzerland. We'll get to them in a moment. But they couldn't really effectively launch a over-water invasion because of the British Navy. They bombed Britain. My mom tells stories about like when she was a young girl with her sister and her sister's baby, and they were living just just west of Liverpool, which is a major port city, and German bombers had been chased away from Liverpool, and they're like, well, they're heading back to base, so they dropped their bombs. And so one bomb went 1 block away from where my mom and her niece and her sister were, and another bomb dropped another block the other direction. They didn't have time to get air cover and so forth, so they were fortunate. But yeah, the bombing raids didn't lead to Britain losing the war, but it still was a problem, especially if you were like in London. They got bombed a lot. So it's still a national security. And the British, if you're the British, what do you do to try and keep German bombers from blowing you to bits and pieces? Well, that's one thing, yes.
You build a big dome and then they can
That's an interesting sort of like Simpsons approach. We're going to build a big dome over our community. What is another one? Anybody have any ideas? What other kind of technological advances? You're like, World War II? I don't know. How do you get planes to not hit you?
A better navy.
So we got boats out here, but we're getting bombed in the city. Yeah, you got an Air Force, exactly. The RAF, the Royal Air Force, which is a very, very important component of the British national security during World War II, they sent the fighter planes up there, the Spitfires and the Hurricanes. And you got these German bombers flying along here. And you got these Spitfires, these British Hurricanes and Spitfires, and the German bombers. Right? They also have a thing that the British called flak, which we called anti-aircraft gun. I like flak, it sounds cool. But you're like, choo, 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 choo. You shoot up all these things. They're like, you're like, oh, we hit one. So yeah. I mean, now we've got really smart technology. We don't just go, oh, I hope we hit them. Now we got like heat-seeking missiles. There you go. All right, so you need that technology. But make sure you write that down. Geography does help. Switzerland. How come Switzerland's neutrality was respected in many, many wars going on in Europe? What geographical advantage was such that people are like, well, we could invade you if we wanted to, but it's just not worth it? Very good, write that down. Mountains. Switzerland is a very mountainous country. And in wartime, even still today, mountains give advantage. Right? We're going to go to war. Trey, me, and you. You get to pick where you're going to defend yourself from. Why? Because they got the top of the mountain. You're on the top of the mountain pointing down, and I'm trying to get up the mountain. And still fire at you, and you're like, I'm on the mountain, and I'm like having it cool. Boom, 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 fighting down. Okay? Because if you get too close, that's a violation of social distancing. Transition. Nope? Something else? Oh, okay. Oh, no, that's fine. I didn't know if you wanted to talk to these guys about social distancing. Yes?
If I were to pick a place, though, it would be underwater.
Not bad. If you can sustain yourself underwater, yeah. If you're in the United States Navy, you want to be underwater and you want to be undetectable. Okay, that's cool. Yes?
But isn't like this, I didn't know that, wasn't the mountains in Switzerland where like Matterhorn originated?
The Matterhorn is, I believe, a mountain in Switzerland. I believe.
Oh yeah, not Matterhorn, but the guy with like the shorts and the long sleeves and yellow.
Sure. I don't know that that has a lot to do with national security of Switzerland, but it is cool.
But is that where it originated?
I think so. Either that or like Austria, southern Germany. Okay? Because there's quite a bit of similarity among those folks. And then large parts of Switzerland, they speak German. But it's called Swiss German, and German exchange students say, oh, those Swiss Germans, I can't understand what they're saying. You know, it's a little different. It's like, do all people in America talk the same? Or do some people have really strong accents in some parts? And you're like, what? Yes.
I just wanted to say how, I was watching this show called Medal of Honor.
Uh-huh.
And it talks about how, like, everybody got medals of honor. And all of them were like, because America has, like, their own little, like, camps in, like, Afghanistan for Nigeria, I guess. But they're all in mountains. And I feel like mountains would be harder because then it's easier for people to, like, sneak up on top of mountains and then shoot down. Because all the
If they get above you. Some of you guys might remember the story in the American Revolution where the Americans were like, hey, we got Fort Ticonderoga. We're really good. We're right on the water. And then the British figured out a way to like climb above it and then point their guns down on them. Always that high vantage point is very helpful. Okay? Yeah. So, geography. Some places are easier to defend because of the geography. Russia, write it down. We're going to be learning about Russia in our next unit. Russia has had some difficulty throughout its history defending itself. Geography does not always favor Russia in a fight. And we'll develop that as we go through the history of Russia. And we're going to cut some slack to the Russians for not having a government that has developed freedom. Other countries, like the United States, Switzerland, Britain, and I would say even Britain before we became the United States. Because the American colonists, I was asking one of the classes, like, why did we declare independence? What was it? What was it that the British government was doing that we're like, you're illegitimate? Were they failing on national security? No, it was taxing. It was like, what category does that fit into? They're violating our, what? Economic social satisfaction? Not so much. Freedom. We had developed in the British colonies a love for freedom. Where did we get that from? From Britain. And we kept that with us, even though, I mean, if you look and you're like, why did the Americans, a lot of them, patriots, rebels, why did they revolt against the British rule in 1776? Was Britain not doing a good job on national security? Not really. Domestic security? Not really. I mean, if anything, the riots were being caused by like freedom fighters and Sons of Liberty. Economic social satisfaction? Not really. It was that they were trying to do things that really cheesed us off, like taking away our freedom to like rule ourselves and set our own taxes and things like that. The point is, make sure you have that in there. Where you have stability over a long period of time, where things are good on national security and the other ones, domestic security, economic social satisfaction. When things are good, people can develop. Like, all right, we got that government, that's good. Now give us some freedom. Protect our freedoms, right? Think of yourselves. Are you willing to work real hard to get food on the table, to get a house, to get transportation, to get clothing, things that as young adults, are you willing to work really that hard? If you have success with it, and I hope you do you want to also have some time off? Do you want some other things besides just the basics? How many guys like, I'd actually like to be able to make enough money to afford to have some time off? Would you like that? Would you like that, Jana? Or do you want to work 52 weeks out of the year? You're like, some breaks. Think of that analogy as like, people, do they want some freedom? Do they want to be heard? Do they want the government to be responsible to them? Now, in Britain, there will be stability. For most of their history, freedom will develop. Switzerland, thanks to the mountains, in part, freedom and expectation will develop. It's not going to develop as much in Russia. Write this down. The geography doesn't help. If you look at the western borders of Russia, there's no mountain features. You know, you have some rivers that help sometimes. No real good defensible natural barriers. And we will see when we look at the Russian history, there's going to be lots of waves of invaders coming from the west. In fact, one that you're familiar with, there was an invader from the east, not too many from the